Hello everyone and welcome back to Microsoft Dynamics 365 plugin development course. And in this video we will learn how to register a plugin after you have developed. So you can register a plugin in Dynamics 365 customer engagement app in multiple ways. First way you can register a plugin is through plugin registration tool. That is the most widely used way to register a plugin in Dynamics 365 server. The other way is to programmatically you can register a plugin. And lastly, you can use developer tools to register a plugin. As far as this course is concerned, we will only see the plugin registration tool to register a plugin. So let us now see what is a plugin registration tool. Plugin registration tool is provided in the SDK. It gives you a graphical interface for plugin registration. This is used to register plugin, custom workflow activities and custom actions in Dynamics 365. It is not only used to register a plugin, that you can also register custom workflows and some actions using plugin registration tool. So where you can find this tool? This tool you can find in the SDK tools and plugin registration folder. So navigate to the path where you have downloaded the SDK. I have downloaded that SDK under C drive dev tools. In tools folder you will see one more folder called plugin registration, and you can see an application or an exe file called plugin registration tool. You have to use this application. And for simplification, I have divided the plugin registration process into three sections. The first section is you have to connect to the server. That means for which instance you want to register a plugin, and then you need to register an assembly, and at the last you have to register the plugin. So let us now begin how you can connect to the server. There are different ways of connecting to a server if your Dynamics 365 instance is online or on premise. So the first thing you need to choose is what is the deployment type of your Dynamics 365. If it is online, then you have to select this radio button, and then after selecting it you need to select the online region, then provide your username and the password details, and after that you can select this option to display the list of available organizations, so and then click login button. So with this you will be able to connect to the server. But if it is an on-premise instance, then select the radio button here which says on-premise, then provide the server name. So first you need to specify on which server Dynamics 365 application is hosted, and with specify the port number if any, if what is the authentication source, whether your Dynamics 365 on-premise is an IFD deployment or not. Then provide your username and password and the domain name you need to provide, and then you can select the option to display the list of available organization and then click login. So this is how you can connect to a Dynamics 365 servers depending on the deployment type. Now we will see the demo of it, how you can connect to a Dynamics 365 server practically. In this demo I will connect to an online instance. So I have navigated to my SDK's plugin registration folder. I'm double clicking on this application. So the moment it opens, it will be a blank application. You need to create a new connection. So now I will choose the deployment type as Office 365. I will select my online region where it is hosted. So I know that I have hosted my Dynamics 365 instance in India. Then I will give my username and the password. And then I'm selecting the display list of available organization, and then I'm clicking OK. So with this, what I have done is I have created fast connection with the online instance. Now you can see it is showing me the organization name for which specific connection has been established. So you can add one more connection if you want to connect to the different organization. Now this connection is successfully established. So that is the end of section 1. In our next session we'll see how to register an assembly. So in previous section you have seen how you can set up a connection to a Dynamics 365 instance through plugin registration tool. And once you have established that connection, next step is to register the assembly into Dynamics 365. So how you can do it? You first need to click the register button here, and there you need to select the new assembly option. The moment you click that register new assembly option, you will see this kind of pop-up in your screen. Then you need to first load the assembly, then select what all plugins that you want to register in this assembly. Specify the isolation mode. What is isolation? So isolation is something is dealing with the trust factor. There are two kinds of trust: full trust or partial trust. Full trust are whenever a plugin is registered outside the sandbox. That means when you select none during your plugin registration tool, those plugins will run in full trust mode. In which, so for what scenarios you will be having full trust? Whenever your Dynamics 365 deployment is on premise, WPW3 server process will take care of your plugins that are registered in full trust manner. That means your, even if there is some and what is partial trust? Those plugins registered in sandbox mode are known as in that is known as partial trust. That means you can register a plugin in partial trust for both online and on-premise versions. But for on-premise version, you cannot register an online plugin with full trust. So who will be responsible for executing this? Who will be responsible for handling this plugins registered in partial trust? This is microsoft.crm.sandbox.worker process.exe. This process will be responsible to handle those plugins that are registered in partial trust. Now, what is sandbox architecture? So, sandbox architecture is something that it has its own separate processing service. It executes in partial trust with certain restrictions. It allows multiple process servers, and it has execution time limit of 2 minutes. So what does that mean is, what a sandbox is, whenever you register a plugin in sandbox mode, then that sandbox isolation mode imposes certain restrictions in your plugin code. So what are those restrictions? The restrictions are only HTTP and HTTPS protocols are allowed within your Dynamics 365 plugin code. You cannot use the FTP protocol. That means you cannot write and you cannot access the local drives and local file folder structure of that server when you register a plugin in sandbox mode. The other next restriction is you cannot access the local host. So accessing local host is strictly not permitted in sandbox mode. You can never use the IP addresses in whenever you register a plugin in sandbox mode. You cannot use the IP addresses in your plugin code. You must use the named web address which requires DNS resolution. So that is one of the key thing you need to keep in mind. And the other thing restriction is that anonymous authentication is supported and it is recommended. You There is no provision for prompting for credential or saving credentials somewhere in your local folder on the server, local local path on your server, and you cannot retrieve it from there, simply because it is not allowed in Dynamics 365 whenever a plugin is registered in sandbox mode. So those are the certain restrictions that you need to keep in mind whenever you are dealing with the or whenever you are setting up the sandbox, whenever you are deploying the plugins in sandbox mode. So with this, what you understand is And the last factor you need to uh, consider when you are registering plugin in whenever you are registering a plugin, the transaction support is in Dynamics 365. The stages that support in database transaction are pre-operation and post-operation. So as we have already seen that the database transaction, let us now understand the transaction support whenever you are registering a plugin. So when you consider that, when you say that something transaction, when you, as we already know that stage 20 and stage 40, that means pre-operation and post-operations are considered in database transaction. So stage 10 is not considered in your database transaction. So uh, if your code you are so if there are certain code in your validation, so as far as the Dynamics 365 plugin registration is concerned, only the code that is written in pre-operation and post-operation stages will be regarded in database transaction. So the next thing, any uncaught exceptions will force the entire plugin to roll back. And I execution context will be considered in transaction, and the transaction is spanning only the database, only the transaction spans only in Dynamics 365 database transactions only. That means no distributed transactions is supported. What does that mean is, if your if any exception is, and if within your code you are making, if within your plugin code you are making updates to a third party database from your plugin code, then, and after that if there are certain errors occurs after there, and after that updation, if there is any change occurs or any exception is raised, then it is not going to roll back the operations that has been performed on third party database from your database, from your plugin code. So it is only going to roll back those changes that are done in the Dynamics D365 database, and to D365 database only. It is not going to roll back any changes on the third party applications or third party data source. So having said that, let us now understand how you can register in. So uh, that is what is called as isolation mode. So after specifying which isolation mode, you in step number 4 you need to specify where the assembly should be stored. So there are three places to store a plugin assembly. First is database, where the plugin DLL will be uploaded in the Dynamics 365 database. The other option is DLL is saved on the CRM server hard disk. If you say, the other option is to save it on the disk, where the where you are specifying to store the DLL on the server hard disk. And last is the plugin, the you can store the assembly in GAC. GAC is nothing but the global assembly cache. So in this case, the plugin DLL will be loaded into GAC on the CRM server's global assembly cache folder. So what's the difference between all these things? Let us now see. So after selecting the storage option, you need to click register selected plugin. So what is the difference between all these things and which option should you choose? You should always choose to store your DLLs in database. Why? Because it has its certain advantages. What are they? If the plugin is stored in database, then it will be backed up whenever a database is backed up. So whenever you take the backup of your DB, your plugin DLL will also be automatically part of that database, so it will be automatically backed up. But if you have chose to store your But if you have not chosen database option, then if you have chosen either server or GEC, if you have selected either disk or GEC option to store your assembly, then you have to manually take the backup of your assemblies regularly, apart from the database backup. Like, and if you have stored the plugin DLL plugin assembly on database, then if you have multiple server configuration, then you do not need to deploy that server on each and every server that you have, where the Dynamix 365 server is loaded. But in case of in both the other cases, you have to register that plugin on all the servers where the multiple server configuration is involved, and that becomes a very tedious job for a system admin or a database admin, because whenever any changes occurs, you have to perform the same change on each and every server, and you have to take the backup of each and every server assemblies. The next advantage is the plugin in database can be added to the solutions, while disk and GEC of plugins cannot. So that is one of the main reasons that you should be registering the plugins in database only, because whenever you want to deploy the plugins from one server, one environment to another environment, like from development region to your UAT region or your production, then if your plugins are registered in database, then you can include those plugins in part of as a part of your solution. Otherwise, what you need to do is you have to register the plugins whenever you are moving. You have to register freshly each and every time to a new environment with the new DLLs whenever you are moving the whenever you are performing any deployment. The other advantage is that plugins deployed in GAC. The other point is whenever the plugin deployed to GAC or disk will need to IIS reset to refresh the plugin, while the plugin deployed in database do not need to reset your IIS. That means that after you have deployed your plugins either on GAC or disk, you have to restart your server, or you have to perform IIS reset every time you deploy it on the server, so that the server will pick up the updated version or the updated DLS from the next time. Otherwise, it will be keep so which might lead to concurrency issue, which might leads to which might uh, which sometimes lead to concurrency issue, and your operation will not perform successfully. So that is one of the key thing. If your plugins are registered in GAC or disk, every time you make any update, you have to make sure that you perform IIS reset. And lastly, the sandbox and CRM online plugins have to be developed deployed in database. You do not have option to choose GAC or disk option when you are registering a plugin in sandbox model on sandbox side isolation model, sandbox or isolation mode, simply because of the fact you do not have access to the uh, simply because of the fact you do not have physical access to the servers. So having said that, that is the end of how you can register an assembly, where we have seen in detail how to register a assembly and what are the isolation modes, and how what are the different places where you can store the assembly in this. So let us now move on to the next section. So let us now see that with an help of an physical example. Let us now I will show you how to register an assembly with the help of plugin registration tool by giving you a demo. So in the last section, we have already created a connection. So as you can see in our last step, we have already created a connection. Then I am doing what I am going to do. I will click on register button and selecting register a new assembly. The moment I click on that button, I will get and pop up a new window where the step one is I need to locate my plugin DLL. So I have navigated to the correct path and I'm selecting the plugin DLL. Then you can see it automatically asks, then it has already, then you can see it has populated all the plugins that are available in the DLL. So I'm selecting all and then I'm selecting sandbox or none. Then I need to specify the isolation mode. Since my instance is online, so I have to register my plugin assembly into sandbox mode or partial trust. And you can see it is already smart enough to understand that my connection is online, so it is not allowing me to select none option or full trust mode. And the other thing, and the next step that you need to specify is to where I want to store the assembly. So as since it is online version, I have to register my plugin assembly into the database. I do not have so I cannot register my so I'm not so I have to so I'm registering my plugin on database and then I'm clicking register the plugin. So you can see a message has been shown up that a plugin has been registered, one assembly has been registered and two plugins are registered. So click OK and now you can see that a new assembly is registered with two plugins. So this is how you can register an assembly